Everybody knows this guy. He's on a salad, he's in your calendar, he's the one Roman your history teacher definitely mentioned. And almost everything the average person can tell you about Julius Caesar is either flat wrong, lifted from a play written more than 1600 years after he died, or a rumor his own soldiers invented to humiliate him at a parade. The real Caesar spent most of his 30s so deep in debt that his creditors had to keep funding him just to avoid losing their own money. He also, by his own written count, killed more people than most modern wars manage. So let's fix your Caesar knowledge, because right now it's mostly Shakespeare fan fiction with a side of salad dressing. Not born that way. Let's kill the biggest one first. Julius Caesar was not born by cesarean section, and cesarean sections are not named after him. The Roman procedure did exist, and it was horrifying. Under Roman law, if a pregnant woman died or was clearly dying, the child had to be cut out before burial, partly for religious reasons, and partly because a Roman would rather have a live heir than a tidy funeral. The mother did not survive it. Nobody was performing this operation on a healthy woman and expecting her to walk away. Caesar's mother Aurelia walked away just fine. She raised him, ran interference in his political scandals, once caught a man sneaking into her house, dressed as a woman during a women-only religious festival, and lived until roughly 54 BC, when her son was in his mid-40s, and busy conquering Gaul. That's about 45 years of post-Caesarean survival. So where does the name come from? Probably the other direction entirely. An ancestor picked up the cognomen, and Roman family nicknames were usually descriptive and usually unkind. The candidates include Caesares, meaning a thick head of hair, which is deeply funny given what happened to Caesar's own hairline. There's Cadir, to cut. There's a claim that an ancestor killed an elephant and that Caesai was Punic for elephant. The Romans argued about it themselves, which tells you the answer was already lost by the 1st century BC. A random Julius got a nickname, the family kept it, and a surgical procedure eventually borrowed it. The salad, we'll get to. Broke. Historically broke. Nobody puts this part in the textbook. For most of his political career, Caesar was a financial disaster. The Julii were patricians, which meant ancient blood and social ranking. It did not mean money. Caesar grew up in the Suburra, a crowded, fire-prone neighborhood at the bottom of Rome, the kind of address that made senators wince. His family had prestige and no cash, which in Roman politics is the worst possible combination, because prestige creates expectations, and expectations cost silver. Roman elections were not funded by campaign donations, they were funded by spectacle. When Caesar became aedile in 65 BC, the job that put him in charge of public games, he did not budget. He staged gladiator shows on a scale the city had never seen, reportedly bringing in 320 pairs of fighters. And he quietly restored the monuments of Gaius Marius, his uncle by marriage, whose memory had been officially erased. The crowd loved every second of it, and Caesar walked out of that office owing money to half of Rome. Then he spent more on the Pontifex Maximus election in 63 BC. The bribery was so aggressive that Caesar reportedly told his mother that morning he'd either come home as chief priest or not come home at all. He won. By the time he was assigned a governorship in Spain in 61 BC, his debts had reached roughly 830 talents, around 17,500 kilograms of silver. His creditors physically blocked him from leaving the city because a governor who dies abroad is a bad investment. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, covered him, at a cost of roughly an eighth of his entire fortune. That transaction quietly explains the next 20 years of Roman history, because once Crassus was that exposed, Caesar failing stopped being an option for him. He had to keep the man solvent. Caesar looted his way across northwestern Spain, paid everyone back, and came home with a war record and a clean balance sheet. He had figured out the trick. Debt is not a weakness if you owe enough that your lenders need you to win. The pirate thing. Around 75 BC, a young Caesar was sailing to Rhodes to study public speaking, because in Rome, a good voice was worth more than a good sword. Cilician pirates grabbed him near the island of Pharmacusa. They asked for 20 talents. Caesar was insulted. He told them they clearly had no idea who they'd caught and instructed them to demand 50. They agreed, which should have been their first warning. He then spent, by Suetonius's count, nearly 40 days, as the worst hostage in maritime history. He sent his people off to collect the ransom, kept only a physician and 2 attendants, and treated the pirates as staff. When he wanted to sleep, he sent word for them to stop talking. He wrote poems during the day and made them sit and listen, and when they didn't applaud enough, he called them illiterate barbarians to their faces. And he told them, repeatedly and cheerfully, that once he was free he was going to come back and crucify every last one of them. They thought this was hilarious. A rich kid making threats from inside a pirate camp is entertainment. The ransom arrived. Caesar was released at Miletus. He then did something with no legal basis whatsoever, because he held no office and commanded no troops. He privately hired ships and crews, sailed back to the anchorage, found the pirates still sitting there splitting his money, and captured all of them. When the local Roman governor stalled, apparently more interested in their sale value, Caesar went around him and had them crucified exactly as promised. Plutarch adds the detail that seals the whole personality. Caesar had their throats cut first, before the crosses, because he considered them friends and wanted to be merciful. That is the single most Roman sentence ever written, worth flagging. Plutarch and Suetonius disagree on the details, and Velleius Paterculus, writing closer to the events, says the pirates were sold into slavery instead. The crucifixion is contested. The part where a hostage rates his captor's poetry appreciation is somehow better attested. Sulla wanted him dead. Long before any of that, teenage Caesar landed a job that should have ended his career before it started. Around 84 BC, at roughly 16, he was nominated to be the Flamen Dialis, the high priest of Jupiter. This sounds prestigious. It was also a lifetime of absurd restrictions. The Flamen Dialis could not ride a horse. He could not look at an armed army. He could not spend 3 consecutive nights outside Rome. He could not have a knot anywhere on his clothing or his body. He could not touch a goat, a dog, raw meat, beans, or ivy. His hair had to be cut by a free man using a bronze blade. He was, in effect, a sacred houseplant. To take the post, he married Cornelia, daughter of Cinna, who was running Rome at the time, which was fine right up until Cinna's side lost. Lucius Cornelius Sulla marched on Rome, won, and started publishing lists of people whose deaths were now legal and profitable. He annulled Cinna's appointments, stripped Caesar of the priesthood and of Cornelia's dowry, and told him to divorce her. Caesar, aged about 18, with no power, no army, and no leverage, said no. Then he ran. He hid in the Sabine hills, moving between houses, sick with what was probably malaria, carried from one hiding spot to the next. One of Sulla's patrols found him anyway, and he bribed the commander with 2 talents to look the other way. His mother's family went to work on Sulla, and the Vestal virgins interceded. Sulla gave way and let him live, minus the priesthood. Suetonius records that Sulla warned the men who talked him into it that this boy would be the ruin of the aristocracy, because, in that Caesar there are many Mariuses. It's a great line. It's also probably apocryphal, the sort of prophecy that gets invented once everyone knows how the story ends. Caesar did not wait around to test it. He left for military service in Asia, and at the siege of Mytilene in 81 BC, he saved a fellow citizen's life in combat and won the civic crown, an oak wreath that required every senator present to stand when he entered a room. Not bad for a kid legally forbidden to look at an army 18 months earlier. The Queen of Bithynia. Caesar's reputation in Rome was not brilliant general. Not for decades. It was closer to that guy. The first scandal stuck hardest. In 80 BC, on that same eastern posting, he was sent to King Nicomedes, the fourth of Bithynia, to collect a fleet. He took a very long time about it, then went back a second time for reasons nobody could explain. Rome decided the reason was obvious. The rumor that Caesar had been the king's lover followed him for 35 years, and Romans, who treated the passive role in a relationship between men as an unforgivable loss of status, never let it go. His own consular colleague Bibulus, who despised him, publicly called him the Queen of Bithynia. Curio the Elder described him as every woman's man and every man's woman. Then came the part that says everything about Roman humor. At his own triumphal parade in 46 BC, at the absolute peak of his power, his legionaries marched behind his chariot singing about it because tradition demanded that soldiers mock the man they were celebrating. One surviving verse runs roughly, Caesar conquered Gaul, Nicomedes conquered Caesar. Another warned the citizens of Rome to lock up their wives because the bald adulterer was coming home. Yes, bald. Suetonius says Caesar was extremely sensitive about his hairline, combed what he had forward over his forehead, and that of every honor the Senate ever voted him, the one he enjoyed most was the right to wear a laurel wreath at all times. Conqueror of Gaul, dictator of Rome, living god, very worried about his thinning hair. The adulterer part was earned. His most serious long-term relationship was with Servilia, a formidable political operator, and the half-sister of Cato, his greatest enemy. He gave her a black pearl that Suetonius valued at 6 million sesterces. During the Catiline debate in 63 BC, Cato spotted a note being passed to Caesar, accused him of taking conspirator mail, and demanded it be read aloud. Caesar handed it over. It was a love letter from Cato's own sister. Cato threw it back and called him a drunk. Servilia was also the mother of Marcus Brutus, which has produced 2,000 years of speculation that Caesar killed his own son. He didn't. Caesar was about 15 when Brutus was born. 1 million dead Gauls. Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar conquered a region covering most of modern France, Belgium, and Switzerland. He did it with 8 to 12 legions, and he did it because he needed money and glory in that order. The numbers attached to that decade are genuinely difficult. Plutarch and Appian both report that Caesar fought 3 million people, killed 1 million, enslaved another million, and took 800 towns. Caesar himself claimed he wiped out 430,000 Germanic Usipetes and Tencteri in a single engagement, women and children included, after their leaders had come to negotiate under truce. That one caused a genuine scandal in Rome. Cato stood up in the Senate and proposed handing Caesar over to the Germanic tribes in chains so they could prosecute him for violating a truce. The motion went nowhere, because Caesar was too useful and too popular by then, but a serving senator wanting his own general extradited as a war criminal tells you the campaign was extreme even for a society that treated conquest as a civic virtue. Modern historians treat the figures with heavy suspicion. Caesar reported capturing Helvetii census tablets showing 368,000 migrants, including 92,000 fighting men, with only 110,000 left alive afterward. Current estimates put the actual migration closer to 20,000 or 50,000. Scholars also note that Caesar records almost no Roman casualties anywhere in the entire work, which is not how war functions. The real number of dead Gauls is unknowable. That the campaign was catastrophic for Gaul is not seriously disputed, and several historians have argued the word for it is genocide. The military high point was Alesia in 52 BC. Vercingetorix, the one Gallic leader who managed to unite the tribes, holed up in a hilltop fortress with around 80,000 men. Caesar, badly outnumbered, decided to build his legions through a ring of fortifications around the hill, then a second ring facing outward to hold off the relief army they knew was coming. Total length of the works, roughly 25 miles, with ditches, towers, and fields of concealed spikes. When the relief force arrived, a number Caesar puts at a wildly improbable 250,000, his men fought in both directions at once and held. Vercingetorix surrendered the next day. Caesar kept him alive in a Roman prison for 5 years, so he could be walked through the streets during the triumph, then had him executed that same afternoon. At Uxellodunum, the last holdout, Caesar cut off the hands of every surviving defender and released them, so Gaul could watch what continued resistance looked like. He wrote his own press. Every year during that war, Caesar sent a book back to Rome. The Commentarii de Bello Gallico is one of the most influential pieces of writing in Western history, and it is also, functionally, a very long press release. Caesar wrote it in the third person, not I decided but Caesar decided, not we were surrounded but Caesar, perceiving the danger, moved to the exposed flank. The effect is a neutral observer, marveling at how consistently correct one particular general keeps being. He published as the war ran, dispatching each installment to a Rome full of voters who could not check a single claim. The Senate voted him 15 days of public thanksgiving after one campaign, an unprecedented length, then 20 days after Alesia. Nobody in that chamber had seen Gaul. They'd read about it. The prose is famously plain, and the plainness was the weapon. Cicero, who was not a fan, praised the style as clean and stripped of ornament, which is exactly why it works. It never sounds like it's selling anything. The victories are Caesar's. The setbacks are the weather, or a subordinate, or Gallic treachery. And the greatest joke in the history of education is that this text became the standard entry-level reader for Latin students. For centuries, teenagers across Europe learned the language by translating a warlord's campaign propaganda, sentence by sentence, graded on their grammar rather than their skepticism. Gallia est obni divisa in partetre. Millions of children have parsed that line. Very few were told it was written by a man who needed a triumph to escape prosecution. The year with 445 days. Caesar's job as Pontifex Maximus included managing the Roman calendar, a lunar mess that required priests to insert an extra month whenever the seasons drifted too far off. The problem with that system is that the priests were politicians. A longer year meant your allies stayed in office longer. A shorter one meant your enemies got out faster. So, intercalation became a political tool. And then Caesar spent 9 straight years in Gaul and simply stopped doing the paperwork. By 46 BC, the civil calendar was running roughly 3 months ahead of the actual sky. Harvest festivals were happening before the harvest. So he fixed it, permanently, using an Egyptian solution. He brought in Sosigenes of Alexandria, who worked from a solar year of 365 days with 1 extra day every 4th year. To reset the drift, Caesar declared that 46 BC would absorb the entire accumulated error at once. He inserted 67 extra days between November and December, on top of 23 already added to February. Final length of that year, 445 days. Roman writers called it the Year of Confusion, and living through it meant an extra rent cycle. Cicero, who found the whole business insufferable, reportedly answered a man remarking that the constellation Lyra would rise tomorrow by saying yes, by edict. The new calendar started on the 1st of January, 45 BC. Then the Senate renamed the month Quintilis after him, which is why you say July, and why he became the only person in history whose birthday, the 12th or 13th of July, 100 BC, sits inside a month named for him. Rome fell. The empire fell. The Julian calendar kept running for over 1600 years, until Pope Gregory trimmed it in 1582, and several Orthodox churches still use it. Of everything the man built, the conquests, the dictatorship, the dynasty, the thing that survived is a spreadsheet fix. The crown he refused. Caesar's defining political trick was mercy, and mercy is what got him killed. After crushing Pompey at Pharsalus in 48 BC, he did the opposite of what Roman civil war etiquette demanded. Sulla had published kill lists. Marius had done the same. Caesar pardoned people. He forgave senators who had taken up arms against him, restored their property, handed several of them offices. Marcus Brutus, who had fought on Pompey's side, was pardoned and made governor of Cisalpine Gaul. Cassius was pardoned and made a praetor. Caesar called this policy clementia, and made sure everyone knew the word. Cato saw what it actually was. Cornered at Utica in 46 BC, he killed himself specifically to avoid being pardoned, because accepting a pardon meant admitting Caesar had the right to grant one. Caesar's reaction was that he begrudged Cato his death. Since Cato had begrudged him the honor of saving his life, even his grief was a flex. This is the part people miss. Pardoning is not a republican power. In a republic, courts and assemblies decide who is guilty. When one man personally decides who lives and who keeps their property, the Constitution is already over regardless of what anyone is called. Every senator walking around Rome in 45 BC with their life as a gift from Caesar knew exactly where they stood. Then the honors got strange. Dictator for life in early 44 BC, his face on coins, the first living Roman ever to appear on Roman currency, a gilded chair in the Senate House, statues among the kings, a temple, a cult, and Antony as his personal priest. At the Lupercalia festival on the 15th of February, 44 BC, Antony ran up to Caesar in front of the crowd and offered him a diadem, the headband that meant king. Caesar refused. Antony offered again. Caesar refused again and sent it to the temple of Jupiter, saying Jupiter was Rome's only king. The crowd cheered louder for the refusals than the offers. Historians still argue about that scene. It may have been staged so Caesar could publicly reject the crown and kill the rumors, or it may have been Antony freelancing. Some scholars note the diadem was a plain strip of cloth with a possible ritual function, and that the monarchical reading comes largely from Cicero, who wanted Antony destroyed. What's certain is that when two tribunes pulled royal decorations off Caesar's statues, he had them stripped of office, Rome noticed. 23 wounds, one fatal. He had been warned, repeatedly, by everybody. A soothsayer named Spurinna told him to watch the next 30 days, ending on the Ides. His wife Calpurnia woke from a nightmare about his death, and begged him not to go. The sacrifices that morning came back bad. A Greek teacher named Artemidorus, who knew names, pushed a written warning into his hand at the door and told him to read it immediately. Caesar kept it, unread, in his left hand. Decimus Brutus, one of his most trusted officers and a man named in his will, came to the house personally and talked him into attending anyway, asking whether the master of Rome should build his schedule around a woman's dreams. Roughly 60 men were in on it. Only about 20 names survive. They called themselves the Liberators. The meeting was in the Curia of Pompey, a hall attached to Pompey's theater complex, because the actual Senate house had burned down in a riot years earlier. So Caesar's last political act happened in a building his dead rival paid for. Underneath his dead rival's statue, he had no bodyguard. He had dismissed his Spanish escort, on the theory that a man everyone loved and who had pardoned everyone needed no armed men following him around. Tullius Cimber approached with a petition about his exiled brother, then grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down from his shoulders. Casca struck first, at the neck, and made a mess of it. Caesar's recorded reaction was outrage rather than fear. Why, this is violence. He caught Casca's arm and stabbed it with his writing stylus, the only weapon he had. Then everyone came in at once. In the confusion, the conspirators wounded each other. Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue. His physician Antistius examined the body afterward and counted 23 wounds. He also concluded that only one of them, a thrust to the chest, was actually fatal. The rest were survivable, and most were shallow strikes to the abdomen, back, and thighs. The marks of panicking men stabbing a body that was already down. That examination is the first recorded forensic autopsy in history. The founding case of the entire discipline is 60 amateurs failing to kill one 55-year-old efficiently. As for the famous last words, Plutarch says he pulled his toga over his head and said nothing at all. Suetonius reports that some claimed he said, "Kai su, teknon," meaning, "You too, child," to Brutus. But Suetonius himself doubts it and states that Caesar died silent. Et tu, Brute, appears in no ancient source whatsoever. Shakespeare wrote it in 1599. A comet, then nothing. The Senate scattered. The conspirators marched into the forum with bloody daggers announcing that Rome was free, and the crowd went home and locked their doors. Caesar was left lying on the floor of the hall for hours. Eventually, 3 enslaved men put him on a litter and carried him home, and Suetonius notes, with awful precision, that one arm hung down over the side. Then the will was read, and it destroyed the assassins. Caesar left 300 sesterces to every male citizen of Rome. He left his gardens across the Tiber to the public as a park, and he named his 18-year-old great-nephew Gaius Octavius as his heir and adopted son, a young man most senators could not have picked out in the street. He had also named Decimus Brutus, one of the men who stabbed him, as a secondary heir. At the funeral, Antony read that will aloud to the crowd, then displayed a wax effigy of Caesar's body, rotated so everyone could count all 23 wounds. Rome burned the forum as a funeral pyre and went looking for the killers. A poet named Helvius Cinna was torn apart in the street for sharing a surname with one of the conspirators. 4 months later, during games, Octavian was staging in Caesar's honor. A comet burned in the sky for 7 days. Romans called it the Situs Iulium, the Julian star, and read it as Caesar's soul joining the gods. Octavian, who was 19, and already better at this than anyone alive, immediately put the comet on coins and added a star to his adoptive father's statues. In 42 BC, the Senate formally declared Caesar a god, which made Octavian the son of a god, a difficult resume to compete with. That same year, Brutus and Cassius lost at Philippi and killed themselves. Within 3 years, nearly every conspirator was dead. The Republic, they murdered a man to save, lasted 13 more years before Octavian became Augustus, and the whole thing quietly turned into an empire, and the name outlived all of it. Caesar stopped being a surname and became a job title, then a word for ruler, and 1900 years later German emperors were still calling themselves Kaiser and Russian ones, Tsar, both of which are his family nickname with the accent worn off. Also, the salad has nothing to do with him. It was invented in 1924 by an Italian restaurateur in Tijuana named Cesare Cardini, who ran out of food on the 4th of July and improvised with whatever was left in the kitchen. So, the one thing you were most confident about turns out to be a coincidence involving a busy weekend in Mexico, which might be the most fitting monument the man ever got.